All right, so we're diving deep today into something I think a lot of you are interested in, um, self-sufficiency,
Yeah.
especially on a small piece of land.
Mhm.
It looks like you found this program, the Self-Sufficient Backyard, and uh, from what I've seen, I mean, they're
Yeah.
making some pretty big promises.
They are.
What caught your eye so far?
Well, it's created by this couple, Ron and Johanna, and they claim to have 40 years
Okay.
of off-grid living experience.
Wow, 40 years.
Yeah, so their big claim is that they can get a family of 4 to be self-sufficient
Okay.
on just a quarter acre,
Oh, wow.
which is not a lot of space to do that.
Yeah, quarter acre. That sounds pretty tight for complete self-sufficiency.
It does.
But I got to say, the idea of like fresh eggs every morning
Sure.
and, growing your own veggies and not having to pay those crazy utility bills, it's really tempting.
Of course, yeah.
So it seems like they've built this program around 4 key areas.
Okay.
So there's food, water, energy, and then what they call kind of the essentials of homesteading.
The daily stuff.
Yeah, where should we start with this?
Well, let's start with food production because that's a big part of it.
Okay.
And they say that with their methods, you only need 1,020 square feet of garden space per person.
Oh, wow. So they're getting really specific.
Yeah, I always get a little suspicious when I see numbers that precise.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But they have these detailed garden layouts, and they talk about this perpetual mini tower composting system.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah. And they even have specialized gardens for things like medicinal herbs.
I like that composting system, perpetual mini tower.
Yeah.
And I also saw they talk about easy on the back gardening techniques,
Oh, sure.
which is great for anyone who's ever spent hours hunched over.
Yeah, for sure.
But realistically, can you really grow that much food in such a small space?
Right.
What about like climate and pests and
Yeah.
just the time it takes to garden that intensely?
Yeah, those are all good points. And they also mentioned gardens for income-generating crops.
Oh, okay.
So they're kind of implying that you could even supplement your income,
Wow.
which sounds appealing, but I'd be curious to know, like, what specific crops
Yeah.
they're recommending and if that actually holds up,
Yeah, because if you're not growing all your own food,
Right.
you got to make money somehow.
Exactly.
So, okay, we talked about food. What about water?
Right.
I mean, a garden needs a lot of water.
It does. How do you become water independent?
Yeah, how do they approach that?
Well, they talk about a bunch of systems like rainwater harvesting and wells and hand pumps.
Yeah.
They even have this system for like pressurized hot water that's heated by your cooking and home heating.
Yeah, that's really using what you have.
Yeah.
That's smart.
It is, but you have to think about water availability and regulations.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are different everywhere, so what works for them might not work for everyone.
Good point.
No?
All right, so now energy.
Okay.
I feel like that's the big one that people get hung up on.
It is. It is.
When they think about going off grid,
Mm-hmm.
how do you generate your own power? I mean, what do they say?
Well, they have this thing they call a hybrid electricity system,
Okay.
which uses a mix of renewable sources and battery storage.
Okay.
And they really emphasize the freedom of not being reliant on the grid.
Yeah.
And they even suggest that you could sell excess power back to the utility company.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be amazing.
It would, but the thing is, renewable energy systems, they can be very expensive to set up.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Have they addressed that at all, like the cost?
They do mention DIY solutions a lot, and they try to present it as affordable, but they don't actually give you any concrete numbers, so it's hard to know.
It's hard to know what you're really getting into.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got food, water, energy.
Right.
What about these essential homesteading elements that they mention?
Well, it's a kind of a grab bag of topics.
Okay.
They talk about a no-work orchard and seed preservation techniques and traditional food preservation methods like canning and all that, and then natural pest control using birds and bats.
Interesting.
And then they get into a lot of DIY projects like building chicken coops and root cellars and even geothermal greenhouses.
Wow, it's a lot.
It is.
Geothermal greenhouses. That sounds really interesting.
It does.
And I like the idea of using birds and bats for pest control.
Yeah.
It's a lot more eco-friendly than using all those chemicals.
For sure.
But with all these DIY projects, I mean, have they talked about the time commitment?
That's a good point.
Because building a root cellar or a geothermal greenhouse, that's not a weekend project.
No, it's not. And speaking of being realistic, we should probably look at their marketing tactics a little bit.
Yeah, they are trying to sell us something.
Right. They've got a book and a program.
Okay.
So they're going to try to be persuasive. What have you noticed?
Well, they have the classic limited time bonus offer.
Of course.
If you buy now, you get free ebooks on aquaponics,
Right.
DIY projects from the 1900s, and even a guide to finding free land.
Free land!
I mean, come on, who doesn't want free land?
Right.
And then, of course, they have all these glowing testimonials
Oh, yeah.
about how practical and life-changing this book is.
Sure.
So, you know.
You always got to be a little skeptical of testimonials.
Right.
They can cherry pick the good ones.
Yeah.
And we don't really know the full story behind them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, who wouldn't want to believe in free land?
Right.
So we've seen the promises, the components, and the marketing tactics.
Mm-hmm.
But to really understand the self-sufficient backyard, I think we need to dig a little deeper.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to do in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready.
So if you want to follow along, we'll put a link to the program in the description.
Great idea.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. So welcome back to our deep dive into the self-sufficient backyard.
I'm ready for more.
You know, when we talk about self-sufficiency,
Yeah.
we tend to focus on like the big systems.
Right, the big picture stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's the little details that can really make or break you.
I think you're right about that.
Like take their no-work orchard idea.
Okay, yeah, that one caught my eye.
Right.
I mean, an orchard with no work, that sounds like a dream.
It does. So what's the secret?
Yeah, is it some kind of magical tree?
Not quite. It's more about careful planning
Okay.
and like working with nature.
Okay.
So they focus on choosing low-maintenance fruit tree varieties
That makes sense.
that are suited to your climate and using techniques that kind of minimize
Okay.
the need for pruning and pest control and all that.
So less work in the long run.
Exactly. But even low-maintenance trees need some care.
Yeah, it's true.
What about pests and diseases?
Yeah, that's always a worry.
Well, they're big on the natural approach.
Okay.
So they emphasize beneficial insects, birds, bats.
Oh, right. They have that 24-hour biocontrol system.
Yeah, exactly. So you attract these natural predators by incorporating things like birdhouses and bat shelters into your yard.
So you're basically turning your backyard into a wildlife habitat.
Kind of, yeah.
That's a pretty cool idea.
It is.
All right, so let's move on to food preservation.
Right.
Because if you want to be self-sufficient year-round,
Mm-hmm.
you got to preserve what you grow.
Absolutely. What do they recommend?
Yeah.
Well, they're really into those traditional methods,
Okay, like what?
like canning and pickling and
Yeah.
drying.
Root cellaring, all that.
Exactly. All those things that have been passed down for generations.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are getting back into those old ways.
They are.
But they're not totally against modern technology, are they?
No, they're not. They do mention a freezer,
Okay,
but their focus is on reducing reliance on the grid as much as possible.
that makes sense.
So it's about having options and being prepared.
Right. Okay, so what about that composting system?
Oh, the perpetual mini tower.
Yeah, they talk about it a lot, but I'm
Yeah.
still not quite sure what makes it so special.
Well, they claim it's a super efficient way to turn your kitchen scraps into compost,
Oh.
which constantly feeds your garden.
So less work.
Exactly. Minimal effort. They describe it as like a tower structure,
Okay.
and the water and compost kind of flow outwards,
Interesting.
and it creates this living soil that supposedly leads to these abundant harvests.
So it's like they're mimicking nature's composting process.
Right.
But in a more controlled way.
Yeah.
That's really smart.
It is.
And it's good for the environment.
Absolutely.
Less waste, healthier soil.
Yeah. And they say it's perfect for small backyards.
Yeah.
You can get great results even with limited space.
They seem to be all about making the most of what you have,
They are.
which is important when you're working with a quarter acre.
Right.
And we see that in their DIY projects too,
Mm-hmm.
like the chicken coops and the root cellars.
Yeah. And those geothermal greenhouses.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about those greenhouses.
Well, it's a pretty ingenious system.
Okay.
They use the stable underground temperature to heat the greenhouse in the winter.
Oh, wow. So it's like geothermal energy for your backyard.
Exactly. It involves circulating air from the greenhouse through these underground pipes
Okay.
that absorb heat from the earth.
That's so cool.
It
huh?
is. And they claim you can grow year-round even in really cold climates.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And they say the system is relatively low energy,
Okay.
mostly just a small fan to circulate the air.
It sounds great in theory.
It does, but I always wonder,
Yeah.
do they have any data to back up these claims?
Right. Have they shared any real-world examples?
Yeah, because they didn't start out as homesteading experts, did they?
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm curious about their background.
Well, they do share a bit about their journey on their website.
Okay.
Apparently, Ron was a city boy from Philadelphia.
Wow. So no farming background.
Not at all.
That's kind of inspiring.
It is. It shows you don't need to be a farmer to live this lifestyle.
Yeah, anyone can do it.
That's what they say. They emphasize that a lot.
Okay.
You don't need any special skills or knowledge.
So they're making it accessible to everyone?
Right. They present it as a step-by-step guide.
That's good.
But they didn't just magically end up on their little homestead.
No, they do. They said they'd been living off-grid for 40 years.
Yeah, so where else did they live? Yeah. Well, they mentioned living in various places, always trying to be self-reliant.
That's dedication.
They even spent time in northern Saskatchewan.
Wow, that's a tough climate.
It is very harsh winters.
So they really had to rely on their skills to survive.
Absolutely limited access to supplies.
Wow, that's a real test of self-sufficiency.
It is, and they use that experience to add credibility to their program.
I can see that.
They basically say, look, if we can do it in Saskatchewan, you can do it anywhere.
It's a good point, but let's be honest.
Okay.
Not everyone has that kind of dedication or the time to devote to this.
Yeah. What do they say about the time commitment?
Yeah.
Well, they do acknowledge that it's not a quick fix.
Okay.
It's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Right.
They emphasize a gradual approach. You know, even just dedicating an hour a week can make a difference.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's about taking small steps.
Right, building sustainable habits over time.
Exactly, but they haven't been very specific about that income-generating crop.
Yeah, they keep mentioning it.
They do. It's like they're holding back to get you to buy the program.
I thought so. They do mention microgreens, though, right?
They do. They highlight those as a profitable option.
Okay.
High-yield, nutrient-rich.
And you can grow them indoors year-round.
Exactly, even in small spaces.
That's good.
And they suggest selling them at farmers markets or to restaurants.
Okay, so microgreens are trendy.
They are.
They're healthy. But can you really make a living off of them?
That's a good question.
Especially if you're only growing a small amount.
Right. I think it depends on the market.
Yeah, your pricing.
Your production costs.
So we need more information.
We do.
Okay, so we've covered the no-work orchard, the geothermal greenhouses, the composting, the income-generating crops. But what about the money?
Ah, the financial side of things.
Yeah, how much does all this cost?
Well, that's where they get a bit vague.
Really?
Yeah, they talk a lot about low-cost DIY solutions.
Right.
And they say you don't need a lot of money to get started.
Right.
But they don't give you any actual numbers.
No breakdowns.
No.
So it's hard to know what to expect.
It is, and, you know, costs can vary a lot.
Of course, depending on where you live.
Your materials.
Your DIY skills.
Exactly. So it would be helpful to have at least some ballpark figures.
Right, just to give people a realistic idea of the investment.
Yeah, it's something to think about carefully.
Absolutely.
When you're evaluating their program.
So self-sufficiency may be achievable.
Right.
But it's not necessarily cheap.
It might not be.
So I think this brings us to a really important question.
Okay.
What are the drawbacks
of self-sufficiency?
Yeah, what are the challenges, the limitations?
That's a great question, and that's what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've looked at the promises, the techniques, the DIY projects.
But costs.
Yeah, but to really decide if the self-sufficient backyard is right for you, I think we need to look at the potential downsides.
Yeah, absolutely. So join us from the final part.
And if you want to check out the program yourself,
we'll
put a link in the description.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the potential of the self-sufficient backyard, all the promises and the techniques.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to get real about the downsides.
Okay.
The challenges of actually trying to be completely self-sufficient.
Right. Because there are always two sides to every coin.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that people should be aware of?
Well, I think one of the biggest factors is location.
Okay.
You know, Ron and Johanna, they found success on their quarter acre, but their methods might not work everywhere.
That's true.
You know, what thrives in one climate might struggle in another.
Right. You can't just assume that what works for them will work for everyone.
Exactly. And even within the same climate, you have to think about soil quality.
Right.
Water availability.
Local regulations even.
All of that can impact your plans.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to self-sufficiency.
I don't think so.
It's about adapting those principles to your own situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so location is a big one. What else?
Well, the learning curve.
Oh, yeah.
You know, even with detailed instructions, It takes time to master all these skills.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. You're talking about gardening, food preservation.
Renewable energy.
All things that require some knowledge and expertise.
It's a lot to learn.
It is. And even when you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
there are always setbacks,
Like what?
pests, diseases, extreme weather.
Oh, yeah. Nature can be unpredictable.
Very much so.
And those things can really throw a wrench in your plans.
They can, especially if you're a beginner.
So you have to be flexible.
Yeah, adaptable.
Resilient.
Exactly. Self-sufficiency is a journey.
It's not a destination.
Right. It's about constantly learning and adjusting.
Okay, so we've got the practical challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the social aspect?
Oh, yes. That's important too.
I mean, choosing this lifestyle can be kind of isolating.
It can.
You're stepping outside of mainstream society.
And you might not have the same support system.
Right. You might need to find new communities.
Connect with like-minded people.
People who understand what you're doing.
Yeah. And even then,
Yeah.
you could have conflict with your neighbors.
Ah, that's true.
Not everyone is going to be thrilled about your backyard chickens.
Or your compost heap.
Exactly.
Right.
So you have to be mindful of those relationships.
It's about finding a way to coexist.
Right.
So it sounds like there's a lot to consider
There is.
before you jump into this lifestyle.
Oh, I really need to think it through.
Be realistic about the challenge.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean you can't do it.
No, not at all.
You just have to go into it with open eyes.
And find what works for you.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect.
No.
It's about finding a balance.
Right, and you can incorporate elements of self-sufficiency
Okay,
into your life without going all in.
that makes sense.
You don't have to achieve some perfect off-grid ideal.
Right. It's about taking control,
Yeah, empowering yourself,
reducing your reliance on external systems.
finding creative solutions.
And those are skills that everyone can benefit from.
Absolutely, whether you live in a city or on a farm.
So the self-sufficient backyard may not be the answer for everyone,
It might not be.
but it could be a good starting point.
A way to get you thinking about these things.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more,
Yeah.
we've got a link in the description.
Check it out.
It's got all the information about their program.
And some other resources that might be helpful.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it informative.
And inspiring.
And remember,
Yeah.
the most important step is the first one.
So get out there.
Keep learning, keep exploring.
And keep striving for a more resilient life.